The morning air was still, almost unnaturally quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Light filtered through the blinds in thin strips, casting soft shadows across the walls of our modest home in Northern California. I sat on the edge of the bed, one hand resting on my round belly, feeling the steady rhythm of my son's kicks beneath my skin. He was strong. Even before his first breath, he carried a kind of quiet fire in him. My name is Olivia West. I'm 32 years old, a former elementary school teacher currently on maternity leave, and 9 months pregnant with my first child. What should have been the most joyful, sacred, life-changing time in my life had instead become a slow, unraveling ache. One that didn't scream or shout, but whispered endlessly in the silence between my breaths. My husband, Ethan, was already gone by the time I made it to the kitchen. A half-drunk cup of black coffee sat beside his laptop, a blue tie slung carelessly over the dining chair. The door had shut behind him hours ago without a word, just the sound of tires crunching gravel in the driveway as he headed to work. Or, more likely, to his parents' house, which had become his preferred weekend escape. In the early days of our marriage, I mistook Ethan's restraint for strength, his silence for thoughtfulness. I now understand they were barriers, walls he used to keep real intimacy out. He was the type of man people admired at surface level, articulate, composed, well-dressed. But under the skin of that image was a man who avoided discomfort at all costs, who sought validation from his overbearing mother more than from the woman he married. Ethan's bond with his parents had always been intense. Every weekend, without fail, he found a reason to be at their home. Fixing something, running errands, helping with yard work. But over time, it became less about service and more about allegiance. I stopped asking questions when I realized the answers always looped back to some version of, "That's just how my family is." It was difficult to admit that I felt more alone with my husband than I ever did by myself. Pregnancy magnified that loneliness. As my belly grew heavier, as my back ached deeper, as I began to worry about the unknowns of childbirth, Ethan became more and more absent, not just physically, but emotionally. There were no midnight ice cream runs, no gentle hand on my belly feeling the baby kick, no shared nursery painting days like I'd once dreamed of. It was just me, and the weight of everything. Still, I tried to keep a sense of normalcy. I woke up early every day, made breakfast, though Ethan often left without touching it, then tended to the house. Sweeping, doing laundry, preparing meals, running errands. I avoided lifting anything too heavy, especially since I had nearly fainted in a grocery store the previous month. That day, it was my neighbor, Grace, who saw me pale and breathless near the dairy aisle and brought me home. Not Ethan. He was busy. Grace had become my quiet savior. She lived across the street, a retired therapist in her 50s with gentle eyes and an intuitive warmth. It started with small conversations on the porch. Then she brought over muffins one morning. Before I knew it, she became one of the few people I could trust. She never forced me to talk, but she always listened when I did. On one particularly difficult day, I confided in her about how Ethan had asked me, no, demanded me, to walk 3 blocks to buy his preferred brand of beer because I had forgotten it on the shopping list. I was 8 months pregnant, dizzy and swollen, and he had barked at me like I was incompetent. Grace didn't say much. She just looked at me and said, "Olivia, being pregnant doesn't mean you're broken, but it does mean you deserve tenderness." That sentence stayed with me. Tenderness, the very thing that had evaporated from my marriage. My only true outlet was my blog. I had started it casually during my maternity leave. Part journal, part photo diary. I captured moments that grounded me. The purple lavender blooming along our walkway. The steaming bowl of soup I made from scratch. The sun casting golden hues through the nursery window. It was an archive of softness in a life that increasingly felt harsh. My small community of followers left kind comments. Some were mothers, others were just strangers who stumbled upon my posts and stayed. But no amount of virtual affirmation could patch the holes forming in my real life. Ethan had grown colder, more irritable. We barely spoke during meals. Conversations were replaced by commands. His face often buried in his phone, smirking at texts from God knows who as I sat across from him in silence. I wondered how many women were living just like this, invisible in their own homes. Then came the moment that marked the first true crack. It was a Thursday evening. I had spent the entire afternoon making lemon herb chicken, mashed sweet potatoes, and a homemade apple pie, Ethan's favorites. I thought maybe, just maybe, the gesture would pull him back toward me, remind him that there was still something to fight for. He walked in, placed his bag on the floor, didn't say hello, walked straight to the fridge. "No beer?" he asked. I turned from the sink, drying my hands. I didn't make it to the store. I was too tired. He exhaled sharply, slammed the fridge door shut. "You had all day. What else are you even doing?" "I'm almost 9 months pregnant, Ethan." "So? You act like you're dying." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The food went cold. I sat alone, the pie untouched, the nursery silent. The next morning, Ethan behaved as though nothing had happened. He asked if I'd seen his keys, complimented my hair, and kissed my cheek on his way out. The whiplash of emotional inconsistency made my head spin. I stood in the doorway long after his car disappeared, wondering how I had ended up here, loving someone who didn't know how to love back. That evening, he sent a text. Simple, final. "Family trip next weekend. Pack enough for 3 days. We leave Saturday morning." I stared at the screen, heart thudding. My due date was that weekend. I replied, "Ethan, what if I go into labor?" His response was instant. "You won't. Stop worrying. Just sit in the car and relax." I tried to talk to him about it that night, but he dismissed me again. "You're not sick. My mom gave birth 3 times and never made it a big deal. Don't be dramatic." Dramatic. That word. That weapon. Friday night came. I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to my baby's soft movements, my hand on my stomach, tears slipping silently into my pillow. I wasn't scared of giving birth. I was scared of doing it alone. Saturday morning, the sun rose behind a blanket of thin clouds. Ethan was already loading the car. He had packed 2 large suitcases, one for himself and one for me that I hadn't even touched. I stood at the doorway in a loose dress, watching him like a stranger. "Come on," he said. "We're going to be late." I hesitated. My heart raced. But I moved anyway. For years, I had been trained to obey quiet control, so I got in the passenger seat, adjusted the belt around my belly, and said nothing. We didn't even make it past the end of the street. A strange warmth bloomed between my legs. I looked down and saw the darkened fabric. My breath caught. "Ethan," I whispered. I think my water just broke." He slammed the brakes, his face twisted in disbelief. "Are you kidding?" "No, I need to get to the hospital." He looked down at the seat, eyes wide. "You're ruining the upholstery." I stared at him, speechless. Without another word, he got out, walked around, opened my door. "Get out. I'll drive you after I clean this." "Ethan, what?" I said, "Get out. You're not bleeding out. Just sit here. I'll be back." But he didn't stay. He got back in, slammed the door, and drove off. He left me on the curb. Pregnant. In labor. Alone. I stood there trembling, one hand cradling my belly, the other covering my mouth to hold in the scream building inside me. I felt the first real contraction ripple through my body like an earthquake. But worse than the pain in my womb was the realization blooming in my heart. He had never chosen me, and he never would. It took every ounce of strength I had to reach for my phone. But even in that moment of despair, the universe whispered back. Because just as I fumbled with the screen, a familiar voice called out across the street. "Olivia?" It was Grace, and her arms were already reaching out. The car disappeared down the street, its taillights growing smaller with every second. And I stood there trembling, my breath shallow and uneven, as the early contractions pulsed through my body. The warmth between my legs was unmistakable. My water had broken, and I was going into labor. My heart pounded, not just from the physical shock, but from the disbelief of what had just occurred. Ethan had left me on the side of the road while I was in labor, because he was more worried about his car seats than my well-being. And more than that, because he had already made up his mind. The trip with his parents was more important. The cold concrete curb beneath me felt harder than ever as I slowly sank down, wrapping my arms around my belly, trying to breathe through the pain. I remember whispering, "Not now. Please, just hold on a little longer." As if Liam could understand me from the inside, my phone was buried deep in my purse, and I fumbled for it through the fog of panic, but my fingers couldn't work fast enough. Every movement felt too slow, too late. "Olivia." A voice rang out suddenly, cutting through the chaos. I looked up to see Grace, my neighbor, sprinting toward me in her house slippers, her apron still on. She had seen me from her porch, and her face was full of alarm and fierce concern. She knelt beside me without hesitation, her arm already around my back. "What happened?" she asked, though I could barely speak. All I could do was shake my head and whisper, "He left." That was all I managed before another contraction hit. Grace didn't ask for more. She simply took over. Within minutes, she'd called a medical transport service, faster than an ambulance in our area, and stayed by my side as we waited. Her grip on my hand never loosened. In her calm presence, I felt the terror subside just enough to breathe again. The driver arrived swiftly, and Grace insisted on riding with me. In the back of that vehicle, between every contraction, I kept asking myself, how had it come to this? How had I married someone who could drive away from me in this moment? At the hospital, everything blurred. Nurses, machines, voices. I remember the bright lights and the coolness of the sheets. I remember the reassurance of Grace's voice, steady in the whirlwind. I remember feeling scared, not of the labor, but of what would come after. What would my life look like now? Somehow, through the pain and adrenaline, I delivered my baby boy. Liam came into this world crying and full of life, and in the moment they placed him on my chest, the world stood still. I cried, loud, heaving sobs, as I whispered his name over and over again. "You're here," I told him. "You're safe. And I swear I'll keep it that way." By the time my parents arrived from Oregon, I was already recovering in my hospital room. My mother immediately burst into tears at the sight of Liam, while my father quietly reached out to hold my hand. "You're brave," he said, and I broke again. I didn't feel brave. I felt broken and humiliated, angry and raw. But I also felt something else. Something beginning. Something like resolve. Ethan started calling that night. The nurses, seeing my drained expression, offered to silence my phone, but I declined at first. I thought maybe, just maybe, he would say something that would change how I felt. He didn't. The voicemails were a mix of irritation and manipulation. "You didn't have to make such a scene. You should have told me it was serious. My parents are furious. We could have still gone on the trip and taken you after." As if I had ruined his vacation on purpose. As if I hadn't nearly given birth on a sidewalk. I stopped listening after the fourth message. Grace came by the next morning with a small bouquet of lavender and a knowing smile. "Don't waste your energy on someone who's already shown you where you stand," she said softly. She held Liam in her arms and added, "You've got a whole new world to build now." Later that afternoon, Jenna, my longtime friend and now a rising figure in the online parenting world, walked into the hospital room, her expression unreadable. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out her phone. "You need to see this," she said. What she showed me was a short, grainy video, less than a minute long. It had been taken by a stranger on a nearby sidewalk and uploaded anonymously to social media. In it, Ethan was visible. Arms flailing, voice raised, frustration evident. Me, visibly pregnant, standing outside the passenger door. My water had already broken. You could see it on the pavement. Then, without another word, he got in and drove away. The video had already gone viral. Tens of thousands of shares. Thousands of comments. Outrage. Shock. Women and men alike were disgusted. The story had struck a chord, because it wasn't just about me. It was about every woman who had ever been dismissed, disrespected, silenced. I was just one face among many, and the internet had taken up my story as a rallying cry. Within hours, Ethan's name had surfaced, then his employer, then comments from people who claimed to know him personally, calling out his behavior. Jenna had added her own post, carefully crafted, withholding personal details but making it clear that this was real and that it had to be talked about. I wasn't sure how to feel. On the one hand, I had been invisible in my marriage for so long, my pain constantly minimized. Now, the whole world saw it. But exposure wasn't healing. It was overwhelming. Still, something shifted. The silence I had carried for years was broken. Not just for me, but for others too. Grace came again the next day. This time she wasn't alone. She introduced me to Amanda, her cousin, who was a family law attorney. Amanda sat beside me, opened a folder, and said, "You don't have to do anything now. Just know that when you're ready, we can start the process. I've seen too many women go through this. I won't let you become just another statistic." I looked at Liam, sleeping peacefully in his hospital bassinet. And for the first time since Ethan had left me on the curb, I felt clear. I wasn't going back. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't going to try and fix what was irreparably broken. I looked at Amanda and nodded. Let's do it. Filing for divorce was less dramatic than I expected. With the viral video, the voicemails, the screenshots of his texts, and Amanda's strategic mind, we had a solid case. Ethan's initial response was fury. Then came guilt-laced apologies. He tried to call me to make things right, but every word was hollow. He wanted damage control, not redemption. My parents supported me at every step. They helped with Liam's feedings and diaper changes, cooked meals, and reminded me daily that I was not alone. Grace continued to visit, often with books, tea, or just her presence. The media storm kept brewing. Ethan's employer placed him on leave, and eventually he was fired. His name had become associated with the video. His actions now a textbook case of emotional neglect. His parents issued a statement trying to clear their son's name, but it only made things worse. Meanwhile, I began to heal. Slowly, quietly, in between feedings and lullabies, I began to stitch myself back together. I started writing again. Not just blog posts, but personal essays. I wrote about control disguised as care, about silence as a survival tactic, about rediscovering your own voice when the world had made you forget it. I submitted my work anonymously at first, but the response was powerful. Messages poured in from women who saw themselves in my words. I wasn't just reclaiming my voice. I was helping others do the same. One evening, as the sun poured through the window and painted the room golden, I sat with Liam in my arms, his small chest rising and falling with ease. The chaos, the fear, the betrayal, it had all brought me here. Not broken, but burning. Not ruined, but rising. Grace called that night and said, "There's a group of women I think you'd want to meet. We gather once a week. Nothing fancy. Just stories, tea, and solidarity." I said yes. And just like that, I took my first step into something entirely new. Something not built from loss, but from the unshakable ground of survival. The rebirth had begun. Mornings at my parents' house became a quiet ritual. I'd wake before dawn, sometimes because Liam stirred in his bassinet, sometimes because my thoughts did. I would hold him close, his tiny body pressed against my chest as I walked slowly around the living room. The sun would begin to rise over the neighborhood, casting long golden streaks across the hardwood floor. And for the first time in what felt like years, I was beginning to understand what peace actually felt like. There was no yelling, no passive-aggressive silence, no walking on eggshells, anticipating Ethan's next irritation. There was just Liam, my breath, the stillness and the soft rustle of trees outside the window. In that space, I could hear myself again. The legal process was moving forward with a clarity I hadn't thought possible. Amanda was efficient, direct, and protective. We filed for full custody of Liam and laid out every piece of evidence we had. Ethan's abandonment, The recorded voicemails, screenshots of the degrading messages, and of course, the viral video that had made headlines weeks earlier. Ethan, through his own attorney, tried to fight back. He claimed that he was under stress, that I had exaggerated the situation, that I was trying to destroy his reputation. But it was too late. His actions had spoken louder than any apology ever could. In a deposition, Ethan even claimed he had no interest in being a father under these circumstances. I remember Amanda looking over at me with quiet fury. We didn't respond. We didn't have to. His words were a gift in disguise, proof of exactly why Liam needed protection from him. Within a few weeks, the court granted me full custody, and Ethan was stripped of any visitation rights. He had also been terminated from his job officially. With the company's public emphasis on family values, keeping him employed would have been a contradiction they couldn't afford. According to a few local sources, he had moved back in with his parents and was unable to find stable work. Employers wanted nothing to do with the man the internet now knew as the husband who drove away. Despite the public spectacle, I chose to remain private. I didn't speak to the media, didn't name him in any interviews, not because I wanted to protect him, but because I wanted to protect myself and Liam. Our healing didn't need to be public to be powerful. Back at home, my parents became pillars. My mother had an endless supply of calm, and my father, always quiet but deeply observant, would sit with Liam for hours, reading to him softly from the newspaper or humming old jazz melodies. Watching them gave me hope. Hope that love could be gentle, that family didn't have to mean fear or resentment. It could mean steadiness, choice, presence. Grace remained a constant light. She would stop by with scones, bundles of fresh herbs, or just to hold Liam while I took a shower or napped. One afternoon, she invited me to a community gathering, just a circle of women who met every week to share space, stories, and support. I hesitated, nervous about being around others again, unsure of how to explain everything I had just lived through. But something inside me whispered, "Go." The gathering was held in the back room of a small independent bookstore downtown. There were about a dozen women, diverse in age, background, and life experience. Some had children, some didn't. Some were divorced, some never married. Each of them had their own story, but what they shared was a willingness to be real. When it was my turn to speak, I started slow. I didn't go into all the details. I didn't need to. They understood. The nods, the soft hums of agreement, the quiet tears. They told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't the only one who had been silenced. I wasn't the only one who had loved someone who didn't know how to love back. After that day, I returned weekly. It became a sacred space for me, a place where I didn't have to perform strength, but could simply be. Around that time, I began writing again. This time, not just in my personal journal, but publicly. I launched a blog called Strong Mama Stories, sharing not only my own reflections, but inviting other women to submit theirs. I wanted to build a space where motherhood and survival and healing could coexist, where women could be celebrated not for enduring pain, but for choosing to rise from it. The blog grew quickly. Stories poured in. From women in small towns and big cities, from first-time mothers and grandmothers, from college students and retired nurses. They wrote about heartbreak and rebirth, about boundaries and bravery. And as I read their words, I realized that what we were creating was more than a blog. It was a collective voice, echoing with truth. Through the platform, I was invited to speak at a local conference on women's empowerment. I almost declined. Public speaking was never my strength. But Jenna encouraged me. "Your story can be a lifeline," she said. "You don't have to be polished, just be honest." And so, on a crisp spring evening, I stood on a small stage with Liam in my arms, looking out at a sea of faces. I spoke about the night Ethan left, about the silence before that, about how easy it is to disappear inside a relationship when you're always expected to shrink. I spoke about Grace and my parents, and the way healing isn't a straight line. But it is possible. When I finished, the applause was quiet, respectful, and deeply felt. A woman approached me afterward in tears and whispered, "You just gave me permission to leave." That night, I cried too. A few weeks later, Grace invited me to a Sunday brunch at her house. The air was filled with the scent of cinnamon and fresh rosemary, and Liam giggled as he was passed between guests like a tiny celebrity. It was there that I met Daniel, Grace's nephew. A pediatrician, soft-spoken and gentle, with a calm that felt like shade on a hot day. We talked about books and babies, about music and gardens. He didn't ask about Ethan. He didn't look at me with pity. He saw me fully, without expectation or judgment. And while I wasn't ready for anything romantic, his presence was like a window cracked open after a long winter. A whisper that maybe one day I could let someone in again. In the months that followed, our lives took on a new rhythm. Liam grew stronger, smiling with more purpose, sleeping longer through the nights. I filled my time with walks in the park, cooking with my mom, reading and writing. The lawsuit settled quietly. Ethan agreed to the divorce under pressure from Amanda and the looming threat of court. The papers were signed, the custody finalized. It was over. One afternoon, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from Grace's husband, the CEO of Ethan's former company. He had read my blog. He didn't mention Ethan directly, but he thanked me for shedding light on patterns of emotional abuse that too often go unrecognized. He said their HR policies had changed because of my story. I held that letter for a long time. Not because it healed anything, but because it reminded me that truth matters. That what we survive can ripple out and protect someone else. The seasons shifted again, and one morning Liam took his first wobbly steps across my parents' living room. We all erupted into cheers, and I cried as I scooped him into my arms. Not just for the milestone, but because those steps felt like a metaphor for us both. We were walking forward. 1 year after the day Ethan left me on the side of the road, I took Liam to the ocean. It was just the two of us. The sky was clear, the waves steady. I stood barefoot in the sand, Liam wrapped in my arms, and watched the tide roll in and out. I whispered to him, "You were born in chaos, but you are made of strength. You are loved beyond measure. And this life, this new life, is ours." I didn't need closure from Ethan. I didn't need apologies or vindication. What I needed was already here, in the breath of my son, in the love of my family, in the voice I had reclaimed. I had once been a woman who disappeared inside her own life. Now, I was a mother, a writer, a survivor, a woman standing in the full light of her truth. And that light, as it turned out, was enough to carry us home. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that makes you want to curl up under a blanket with a book and a cup of tea. Liam had just gone down for his nap, and I was sitting at my desk by the window, answering a few emails and writing notes for a piece I was planning on the emotional cost of invisible labor in relationships. Then came the knock. 3 firm taps on the front door. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone. Grace had called earlier to say she'd be out of town for the day. My parents were visiting my aunt across town. No deliveries scheduled. Another knock. This time, slower. I tiptoed to the front window and peeked through the curtain. Ethan, standing on the porch, holding something. My chest tightened. It had been almost a year since the last communication, since the divorce was finalized and he was barred from contacting me or Liam. The restraining order wasn't permanent, but the boundaries were clear. Amanda had made sure of that. I opened the door only slightly, keeping the screen locked. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked thinner, unshaven, and less composed than I'd ever seen him. But I wasn't about to let that sway me. I needed to talk," he said. "Please, just 5 minutes." I didn't respond. He held up the object in his hand. It was a worn-looking journal, leather-bound. I recognized it immediately. My journal. "I found this in one of the boxes from the old house. I thought you might want it." He passed it through the gap in the screen. I took it warily. "Thanks," I said quietly. "Now please leave." "Olivia, I've changed. I've been in therapy. I know what I did. I know how badly I hurt you." His voice cracked. I was wrong. About everything. I stayed silent. I could feel the pull, the dangerous tug of compassion for someone who had once meant something. But I remembered the night he drove away. I remembered the loneliness, the fear, the way Liam entered the world with no father at his side. "I don't want anything from you," he added quickly. "I'm not here to fight. I wanted to say I'm sorry. Truly, you didn't deserve any of it." His eyes were damp, but my spine stayed straight. "You're right," I said. "I didn't." The silence between us hung heavy. "I've been following your blog," he confessed. "Reading every post. I see now what I couldn't see before, what I refused to see. You've become someone I don't even recognize. In the best way. You're strong. You're radiant." I felt heat rise in my face. Not from flattery, but from anger. The kind that simmers beneath the surface when someone finally sees your worth long after they've thrown it away. "Ethan," I said, voice calm but resolute. "You don't get to come back now and witness the woman I became without you. You don't get to claim understanding just because you've read about my pain. You lived it, and you caused it." He looked away, ashamed. I needed to say it. Whether you forgive me or not, that's not the point. I needed to own it. For me. There was sincerity in his voice. I believed for a fleeting moment that maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe the world had humbled him. Maybe he had changed. But that didn't mean I owed him anything. Closure isn't a door that someone else opens for you. It's one you lock behind you when you're ready to walk forward. "I wish you healing," I said finally. "But please don't come back here again." He nodded, stepped down from the porch, and walked away without another word. I stood at the door for a long moment, breathing deeply. Liam stirred softly in the next room, and that sound alone was enough to center me again. Later that evening, I opened the journal. Most of it was filled with pregnancy notes. Hopes, fears, ultrasound drawings, scribbled dreams about the nursery. But tucked between 2 pages was a letter I had written to myself. Long forgotten. It read, "Dear Olivia, if you ever forget how far you've come, remember this. You survived. Not just the birth of a child, but the rebirth of your own soul. And that's the bravest thing you've ever done." I wept. Not because Ethan had shown up, but because it no longer had the power to shake me. It was just a page in the story I had already rewritten. If this story moved you, if it gave you strength, hope, or simply made you feel less alone, please subscribe to this channel. Your support helps me bring more stories of resilience, healing, and transformation to life. We're building a community here where women's voices matter, where survival is honored, and where the light beyond the wound shines the brightest. Let's grow stronger, together. Hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next chapter.